Right, so we're in the library of the Institute, which I set up in 1991 at the University of London to deal with looking at peace and conflict in the world, and specifically in relation to epistemological dissonance, conflicts between different religions and cultures and paradigms of knowledge. I'd set up a group called Philosophers of Peace back in the 80s, and it was an outgrowth of that. I did 2 years of a feasibility study for the University of London into creating an Institute of Peace Studies, which has grown into the International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. Now, you're in the library of that, in one of the 9 sections thereof. They're dedicated to the 9 muses. This is the room of polyhymnia. So the books in this room are to do with interfaith dialogue, theology, religious studies, and spirituality. So you've got a collection of works on Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, Sikhism, different kinds of Christianity, different forms of paganism, shamanism, Druidry, and so on. Every different philosophical and religious system is I've got a very large collection about each one, actually. Now, why? So what? Well, it comes out of my 30 years of study, private study. Initially, it was private study, just searching for ultimate truth. I decided I wanted to be a philosopher. But then it became a kind of public duty to share the fruits of that study. For many years, I studied privately in Canada, and then I came back to London in 1981, set up Philosophers of Peace, because I felt one has a duty as a philosopher, not just to hoard knowledge privately, but also to disseminate and share it with the wider public. There's a conference going on at Harvard University in a couple of weeks' time about the duty of public intellectuals. It's called Speaking Truth to Power, which is a Quaker phrase, which I very much agree with. And the role of the dissident intellectual, which was important in the 18th century. Kant talked about the phrase sapere aude, dare to be wise. I think we need to rebirth that concept. I think as a culture we're far too timid in this day and age. I think the media plays a big role in that, of kind of brainwashing people. There was a lovely phrase I heard earlier today, the commentariat. We're run by a kind of commentariat, but they seem to avoid the really important questions. I've noticed in the Chilcot inquiry that, to me, the really important questions about ethics and the philosophical basis on which we take moral judgments concerning foreign policy are not actually being asked. And it's as if the commentariat are professionally avoiding asking the big questions. I, as a philosopher for the last 20, 25 years, have been specialising in formulating and asking those big questions. The books I've written address those ultimate questions. I think what human beings want ultimately is meaning. Whereas we're fed a kind of notion that actually it's economic success that people are after. We need economic stability, but ultimately we need metaphysical sustenance. And if people's meaning needs are violated, they come into conflict. They come into cultural, violence, actually. And this is, I think, the roots of what's going on in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So, anyway, the philosophical studies I've been doing are aimed at creating a kind of meta-paradigm in which different faiths, different religions can both affirm their own truths, but stop the contest for who is the ultimate truth. I think what we have to do is acknowledge that in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity, there are different windows on truth. No one has a monopoly. We need to mature beyond that notion and find a kind of metaphysical coexistence whereby different avenues or paths to truth can be mutually affirming rather than competing. I mean, in the Druid Peace Sword of Britain, which I've been given as peace officer to the Druid Council, there are all the different words for peace engraved on the blade. Each language, each culture, each religion has its own conceptual framework, which comes along with the language, be it Hebrew or Arabic. As a philosopher of languages, I've always been interested in how the way we articulate our paradigm comes out of the particular words that we use. A great grammarian in Sanskrit, Panini, did an etymological study of Sanskrit. He discovered that each sound used for the Sanskrit alphabet has a certain metaphysical meaning. In Judaism, the Kabbalists have discovered this with their study of Hebrew. The great Sufis have done the same with Arabic. In the Anglo-Saxon tradition, it was with the runic, masters knew the power of sound. What I'm looking for in my philosophical and interreligious studies is the conceptual equivalence to those primal building blocks of knowledge. In the biblical text, God creates the world through speaking it into being. Really, that's a metaphorical way of talking about this primal urge to creation.
Like in the beginning is the word, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's in John's Gospel. It's in Genesis and so on. It's the same in each different culture and tradition. In the beginning is the word. In the beginning is the logos, which is the thought that then is clothed with the word. Now, each culture has a knowledge that is the case. Hitherto, of course, before the era of global travel and so on, each culture thought it was alone. Each tribe thought it was the only tribe that knew this. So it thought it alone was divine. But what we're now able to do as a global culture is speak across the oceans and the airwaves to each other and discover, hey, you thought that too, so you're divine too. So we have now the chance of a plural spiritual ethos of cooperation. The United Nations is great. I've spoken twice at the UN headquarters. I've been there. It's a great place. But it's only just the beginning of a much longer journey. We have to get to the place of the united peoples and the united hearts of mankind, which comes when each culture, each tribe, each spiritual path shares its secrets, in effect. We all share the same secret, which is our own divinity, our own wisdom path. That's our secret weapon. And when each culture dares to reveal that to each other, the Talibans will no longer be needed. They're just the teeth on the face of the tiger. What the Afghans are saying is, we are warriors. We're proud servants of Allah. Well, so are the British in their own way. Different tradition, different lineage, but equally proud warriors. The stupidity of these warriors fighting each other, in my opinion, could be subsumed and replaced by the wisdom elders of each of these tribes speaking to each other. And that's the vision of the Institute. Create that global dialogue, create that work. The media can help, the alternative media, but also the mainstream media. It's important. That's why I produced this website of wisdom pages. And it's a forum for discussion across all the different philosophies, religions, and scientific traditions. It's also a periodic table of the world's religions and philosophies, presented as in Mendeleev, the great Russian chemist, did with the physical elements, like oxygen, hydrogen, etc. What I'm arguing on that table is that we can understand the great clusters of philosophical system building, like Christianity's, the different varieties of Islam, of Judaism, and so on, and recognise that they're families, like the noble gases or the metals or whatever. So they're clustered together with the same colours, new religious movements, different forms of Hinduism, different forms of esoteric thought. And really it's a tool for the scientific study of each of them. And the recognition that each of them is a valid cultural way of approaching reality, with its own complex historical roots, its own linguistic roots, and so on. The table is not about saying which one is ultimately true or better than another. It's about affirming the complexity and the beauty of human spiritual wisdom seeking. We've been engaged in this project for at least 100,000 years of speaking time. They think that the origin of speech goes back that far. They found archaeological discoveries in a cave in South Africa with evidence of religious worship going back to 80,000 BC. It's only in the last 5,000 years we've had writing since ancient Sumeria. So, as Sir Isaac Newton said, he wrote a book in the 18th century arguing that all religions came from one primal light, and that just as he discovered that the colours of the rainbow came from primal light, and he was the first to really explore this. So he said, well, the same with religions, things like Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and so on. They're like different colours, but the original religion of mankind is the one pure light. So he presented that And he showed the manuscript to his theological colleagues at the University of Cambridge, and they said, don't publish this, Isaac, it's too dangerous. And they put it away in a drawer. And it wasn't published in the 1950s by the University of Liverpool, finally. And he'd spent years researching esoteric stuff and alchemy and things, looking for that primal light, really. Well, my wisdom table, the periodic table of the religions, is in effect bringing to fruition that vision of Newton, finally, using the colours of the rainbow to say, look, here we are, this is all the different philosophical and religious systems of mankind. Let's celebrate it, let's study about it, let's research it, let's not compete. You know, Shintoism, Jainism, Sikhism, they're all valid paths with great heroism and nobility. The logic system I use is not either or. I use the druidical logic of both and, of paradoxical simultaneity, as it's called. Truths coexist. So I think on one level it is true that all these claims to exclusivity are in a sense true, but we have to realise they're very ancient. They date back to when mankind lived in the context of a few valleys. If you only knew about your valley and maybe the next few over, then your tribe was the only tribe, you know, and your God was the only God. You didn't know about all the others, and there's an excuse therefore for having that kind of only consciousness. And then even the first empires, like the Persian Empire, you know, Zoroastrianism was the only way, because that was the religion that unified and bonded the empire. And even dissident forms of Zoroastrianism were excluded as heresy within that lineage. And the same within Christianity and the Byzantine state. Once that became the Orthodox religion of the Roman Empire, and it hived into two parts, the Roman and the Byzantine based, you know, it was the mark of belonging to the club to be a citizen. Citizenship was bound up with this. It was a political issue. So if you weren't signed up to the Orthodox religious view of the emperor and his entourage, whatever they happened to be ruling at one time, sometimes it was Arianism was in favour, sometimes Nestorianism, but mostly Trinitarianism won out, and that became the Orthodox, ideology. You then have to explain it sociologically. It then becomes a kind of badge of belonging to the club or the society.